You're listening to a Pop House Network podcast for developers by developers.
Hello and welcome to the Stack Podcast episode 55, recording on February 4th, 2022. Woo! All right, so this is our very first episode of the year. We kind of skipped January. But my name is Kito Man, and I'm here with a couple of my co-hosts. Daniel Inahosa was not able to make it today, but we do have Josh Juno and Ian Lavitz. Hello, guys.
Hey, Kito. Hey, Josh.
Happy belated New Year.
Yes.
Indeed. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. I'm glad we were able to get together. So what have you guys been up to? How were your holidays? How was January, etc.? So why don't you start, Josh? You're highlighted on my screen. So.
Sure, yeah. So it's been going very well so far. 2022, it's been okay, you know, keeping busy, lots of projects that I've been working on and such. So, and then, you know, it's always good to have kids in school and keeping busy with the sports and stuff. So that is always a very good thing. So everything is active and doing well.
What kind of sports are your kids doing? Because it's kind of cold there.
Yeah, right now it's basketball season.
Okay. So indoor basketball. Gotcha.
Indeed, yep.
Gotcha. Yeah, we're I guess they do have indoor basketball here, but my kids aren't doing it. So
okay.
So they're kind of not doing many sports, except my son is doing taekwondo, which fortunately he can continue to do inside. So.
Yeah. Nice.
Cool. All right, Ian, how about you? How you doing?
Oh, things are good. Yeah, I did a little traveling over the holidays. I went to Canada to visit family and friends, and yeah, it was fun. It was good. Managed to catch up with people and go out for a few beers. And I left just before they shut down all the bars and restaurants. I was literally trying to go see a movie with some friends. We caught the last call at this bar, and next door was a movie theater. So we went over, tried to get in, and unfortunately we didn't make the cut. Like new mandates came in, and like basically they had to shut down everything. So I left town just before, you know, things kind of closed up. So that was good, but yeah, it was a nice visit. I was back for almost 2 months and just, you know, visiting family and friends, like I said. And
that's nice.
Yeah, it was good.
Cool.
I managed to pick up a new M1 Mac while I was traveling, so I'm very happy about that. Amazing machine. Yeah, it's so quiet.
That's to go with your Mac Pro there, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. Like I can tell the difference just from an energy consumption point of view is a huge difference. I'm using running a remote agent on my laptop to build do my Xcode builds and stuff for some side projects I have, and my Intel MacBook was like a 13-inch, couple of years older model, and the thing would get really hot when it's running the builds, and you can hear it. The fans are whirring, and you know it's using a lot of energy. And this thing, the M1 Mac, there's no power nap. Like, it's always on, and it's super quiet. I've yet to hear the fan really kick in and try and cool it off, because they just run like a third of the energy consumption as the Intel.
It amazes me because I got mine, I think it was early December, I think. So now it's, you know, I've completely converted over, and it never gets hot. And there was a period where I would actually use the other one as a leg warmer. It was getting colder outside. Or if it was warm, I'd have to get like this, you know, one of those gel like heating pad, like cooling pad thingies or whatever. If I normally keep them in my office, but if I was moving around, I would have those concerns. And this thing never gets hot. Whenever I'm doing something around the house or going on a short trip, like, you know, locally, and I want to bring my computer, I don't have to bring the power cable anymore.
Right.
I only bring the power cable if I'm going to be out all day long.
Yep, longer battery life for sure. And the MagSafe adapter is back. Yay. We got a dedicated HDMI port. The SD card slot is back. A lot of things came back. The physical keyboard is back. That membrane thing is gone. I suffered through 2 or 3 generations of keyboard gate with the MacBook, Apple experimenting on its
keyboard.
Customers, trying different things. And
yeah, I've got a 2019.
Oh my gosh.
And I didn't care about the keyboard that much, except during the 2020, the crappiest year ever. Not only was the pandemic going on, but I had sprained my ankle, so I wasn't moving around the house, and my office wasn't very comfortable. So I was sitting around the house in like comfortable chairs with my legs up, using that crappy keyboard all the time, every day, as opposed to my fancy, office keyboard. That's why I was so happy to get this one, because I was like, I got to get rid of this keyboard. So
it's definitely an improvement. It's nice to and the touch bar, what was it? It was the touch bar, right? That's what they called it. That little
touch bar,
device is gone. It's gone now.
I didn't really mind I kind of liked it, but getting the machine that I have without it. I mean, if I could pick between the touch bar and like the super battery life and not getting hot and the general performance, I'll pick all that instead.
Yeah. I thought it had a lot of potential for development, actually. And I tried it. And JetBrains, embraced it at some point. They really put a lot of thought into how to adapt their products for the touch bar. And they built all these context-sensitive, context-aware toolbars that they would show up like in the middle of debug. You got your step into, step over, step out, all that stuff, and you stop debugging. The touch bar shows a different toolbar, and it was cool. The only problem is like if you have to look at it all the time to hit it, it's tricky. It's like you get used to it, but you'll never be able to touch type on a tablet, for example, right? Because you need that physical, tactile, information, like the home row, all that stuff. Like if you're a typist, you know how to, navigate a keyboard without looking at it. But this interface, I thought, would never be able to be like something I could intuitively just tap on and use without looking at it. And that's fine.
Thought of it that way.
It's cool if you like for audio, video editing, like as a scrubber, you can adjust volume levels or scrub the playhead forward and backward and things like that. I could see that, not requiring you to look at the thing because you're just sliding your finger. But if it's a detailed like button type interface where you have to tap, buttons do different things, you don't want to hit the wrong one. So that's where it gets a little, it was a cool experiment though. I like, experiencing those new technologies, and then maybe after a while you decide, okay, it was a cool experiment, but
I kind of think maybe they can bring it back in some other form. But at the end of the day, I think they're kind of positioning the iPad to be that second little tablet screen thing.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of which, I scooped up an iPad Pro as well, 12.9 inch, and this thing's amazing. It has a mouse. There's a mouse on the iPad now, like the.
That's cool.
What's it called? No, it's a docking station / smart cover / keyboard. I don't know what it's called here, but I'll show you. Do a little demo here. It's actually plugged in right now, and this is the. I'll have to look it up again because I forget what Apple calls it, but it's a pretty cool little tool. Yeah. It's got a backlit keyboard, and this thing actually doubles as a docking station. You can plug your USB-C cable in the side, and it charges your iPad, and it's got a little touchpad.
Yeah, actually, I've got that.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, they call it the Magic Keyboard, right?
That's what it is. Thank you. Magic Keyboard.
Yeah, I've got that, but just a 10-inch one. And I love the thing. And actually, what I do is if I'm moving around the house and I don't have multiple monitors, like right now, I've got the nice monitor and my laptop monitor. But if I'm moving around, like I'm going outside, I use the Sidecar feature and use the iPad as a second monitor.
Nice.
Which is really handy.
That's how I went through the first couple of months of the pandemic. I had my notebook and my laptop, and then my iPad was the second screen.
It's very handy.
It wasn't too bad.
Yeah, I mean, you do what you can. So yeah. So why don't we move on?
Yes.
I should just mention that I had a pretty good holiday as well. I didn't go anywhere, but my family came over for the first time in a couple of years, so that was really nice. So I got to see my parents in Florida, my brother who lives in Moscow, actually. So, and I got to see his wife and his daughter, which is nice. And his daughter is like just turned 3, so she's like a little adorable, my little adorable niece. So she had fun with my kids. So it was a good break. And now, of course, I'm back to reality and working on a couple of projects. I might have a new thing to talk about, a new product idea to talk about, maybe the next episode or 2. So we'll see what happens. And also, I should mention that we had in January the JChampionsConf, which is a conference that has only Java champions in it. And they just started doing it last year. This is the second year, and it's a virtual conference. And Josh was on one of the organizers, so thank you, Josh. Ken Fogel is the main organizer behind it, who did Dawson Conf. Was it Dawson Conf? Is that what it was called before? The other conference?
It was called DawsCon.
DawsCon, that's it.
Yep.
Yes. So I had the pleasure of speaking there. And I also, well, they also have a moderator. So, basically this is just someone that basically turns on the video stream and helps the speaker with questions. And I got to be a moderator this time because I was like, I want to go to some of these sessions. It was really nice to schedule to be in like, what was a Thursday, Friday, and then a Monday, Tuesday. So it was kind of a nice schedule. There's single track, and there are great talks on like everything related to Java, a lot of JVM stuff, just straight up developer productivity stuff. There's even a talk on MQTT, which is an IoT protocol for messaging. Go ahead.
I was just going to say there also was at least one talk that I know of that wasn't even about coding at all. It was about adjusting to the new, the way things have changed, adjusting your work to fit the current situations and stuff. And so, there was a great deal of diversity in all of the talks. It was a good flow.
And like, there were so many like well-known people, like, just looking for name, Josh Long, Jim Manico, Mary Graleski. I'm just mentioning random people here. Ivar Grimstead, Kai Hortzman, Kirk Pepperdine, Peter Lowry, Emily Jang, Heinz Kibbutz, Victor Renta. There's a whole bunch of them. And so you should check out our show notes. We'll have a link to the conference, and all the sessions are on YouTube. So I encourage you to check it out. My talk was about migrating an enterprise, or basically a Java EE app, from basically upgrading it with style, I call it. But essentially, it's a project that I've been on for a while, where we took like an old app. I think if you've been listening to this podcast, you've heard me ramble about it and mention SOAP and stuff like that. But it basically, we walked through that process and what we went through and what the trade-offs were and all that kind of stuff. The sessions I moderated, one was this really great talk about being super productive with IntelliJ. And the other one was about CodeQL, which is a query language for code from GitHub. It really lets you do some really cool things. They actually use it mostly for security scans, but I think it can do actually a lot more. So I'll put links to those 2 talks because I thought they were good. but there were a lot of great talks there, so highly recommend it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about a couple things which have happened recently or are happening. Josh, you want to tell us a little bit about the Jakarta EE 10, about what's coming up there?
Sure. So just to put it on your radar, you should be looking out for Jakarta EE 10 to be dropping sometime Q1 2022. And this is a pretty big, important and exciting release because, the last couple of years have really been about the namespace change and changing over to Jakarta, and nothing really earth-shattering has been in these last few releases, but now Jakarta EE 10 is going to be starting with a couple of new features here for Jakarta EE, including a new core profile, which is going to be complementing the web profile. And it's also going to be using JavaSE 11 as the base. And you should be able to use JavaSE 11 for not only development, but also running with the TCK if you're interested in doing that. And I think it's also been successfully executed using Java 17 as well. So I'm not sure that you're going to have to be stuck at using 11. You may be able to use 17 in EE 10. Stay tuned on that. There are some removals of things such as EJB entity beans, embeddable EJB container, but EJBs are not going away. I mean, it should be noted that while there are big, scary stories about the days of old with EJB, they are not very, they're not heavy old tools of the past. The newer EJBs that came in the recent version of JavaEE are very lightweight. So lots of them are staying around. But of course, you have alternatives as well. CDI has brought forth lots of alternatives for Jakarta EE. So lots of new things coming in Jakarta EE 10, and it's definitely something to watch out for. Like I said, it should be coming at some point here in the first quarter, and I believe that they'll be starting with some release milestones here very shortly. So
very cool. And I should mention that if you're interested in helping out with any of this stuff, there are a few projects that could definitely use help. I know Jakarta Faces, or formerly Java Server Faces, is one, and there's just a couple more. So if you're interested, check out it's probably the best way to start. I'm trying to think the best entry point.
I would think to look at the mailing lists. Okay. So if you have a specific project in mind, go to that specification. Yeah, you should. If you go to the Jakarta EE website, you can drill down and get to all the mailing lists that way. If you're just interested in Jakarta EE in general, you can join the Jakarta EE mailing list, and the high-level discussions are there, right? But if you're interested in the specific specifications such as JSF or CDI or something, if you get involved in those mailing lists, that's where really all the action happens.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think so I just want to say this last thing, Ian, sorry. The one thing I do think that I just want to emphasize, and a lot of people forget this, is that Jakarta EE sort of underpins a lot of stuff. So even if you're like a Spring Boot person, you still use some Jakarta EE specs, and they're actually moving to the newest. They're moving to Jakarta EE 9, I believe, on Spring at the Spring level. So there's just a lot of great specs, including like JaxRS and JPA and Servlet and all that kind of stuff. So
that's ahead, cool. Ian. Yeah, just a question for you guys. You're definitely more up to date on this than I am. I remember at one point there was JSR submitted by Google and VMware. Rod Johnson was involved with that. That's JSR 330 dependency injection for Java. Is that in use today? Like, do you know what happened to that JSR? Did it make its way into the standard Java, or is it one of the enterprise features, who's using it today?
I believe that's kind of morphed into CDI. That's where CDI came from. So context and dependency injection, and you can use it with core Java. CDI does run standalone, so you can use it either with enterprise or core.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Because CDI is like the previous JSR, right? 299, and then you have the 330.
They actually came out around the same time, because I remember. I think I was on. It was called WebBeans initially. I was on the CDI expert group, but not on the JSR 330 ones. But those annotations are still around. They still exist. I thought there was a slight rev they did to it recently, to be honest, but I don't remember what it was. I'm trying to see if I can. But
is this did this come from Seam, the Seam framework?
No, this was like from the Spring community. It was like
it was
Rod Johnson.
Rod Johnson.
It was Bob Johnson. Also, Bob Lee was involved in that as well. So it had some juice influence, I think.
Got it.
back in the day.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know what, where actually that's defined currently, but it hasn't gone away. I think it's
okay. Supported. Yeah, dependency injection is so ubiquitous today. I mean, any programming language should have some form of DI implementation, right? I think.
I don't know. I think the functional folks will probably disagree with you.
Well,
but
you can combine functional and object-oriented programming.
I agree. I mean, I find it difficult to work without it. But, you know, I found I spent a couple years working with Dropwizard, which was sort of before all the microservice, before Spring Boot and all that kind of stuff. And it had a very non-dependency injection approach. Like the only dependency injection it had were the basic JAX-RS annotations because it was using Jersey. But beyond that, the pattern was, you want a dependency, you write a constructor.
Right.
It has all the dependencies that are needed. And then there needs to be code that creates that, and uses that constructor. And I honestly didn't mind that too much because it was very easy to know what was going on. It was a very clear cut.
Yes.
The only times I really didn't like it was when I wanted to write an interceptor or something, where I wanted to basically, add some functionality before a method was called at an entry point that wasn't immediately obvious how to do that, right? Where if I was using dependency injection, it would be very easy to say, okay, when this dependency is injected,
yes,
when this method
post-construct,
do that. Yeah, there was a lot of hooks to do that. It's a lot easier. And that was where it became more annoying, because then you had to be like, okay, well now I have to write some other class, and then I have to basically take a Lambda and wrap the Lambda. There's all these little weird things you had to do.
Right. I remember years back on the server side, I was really excited about Seam because, speaking of Seam, right, the way it introduced this field injection, right? You had these annotations where you can inject directly into the private fields of your class, and I thought, oh, that is so cool. I don't have to have a big fat constructor. I don't know if you guys have ever worked with tools like MyEclipse that generates that reverse engineering code from your database, your JPA classes, and they go overboard and they say, okay, we'll give you a no-arg constructor. We'll give you a minimal constructor, which was pretty clever because it's based on your non-nullable columns. And then it gives you a full constructor. And this thing was like a full constructor, right? If your table had more than 10 or 15 columns in it, that thing was just ridiculous to look at. I'm like, that's a huge constructor, right? You have so many arguments coming in there. Yeah. And, that maintaining that code by hand would not have been too much fun. But again, if your IDE or if your tooling can generate a full constructor for you every time you add a field, you run some shortcut in your IDE, JetBrains does that actually. If you add, at least for Swift, right? If you add a new private field and you don't make it optional, you have to initialize it in your constructor. So it gives the IDE, the first of all, compiler will say, hey, that's not legal. And secondly, the IDE will say, do you want to generate a constructor? And it'll regenerate it for you. So that's nice. But yeah, I remember debating this with Rod Johnson. I was saying, isn't this nice, this field injection in Seam? And he replied, he said, I was amazed that he actually replied to me and said, I prefer setter injection. At the time, that's what Spring was using. And he said, I prefer setter injection, but in some cases, the economy of field injection can be nice, but no, I prefer setter injection. So at the time, Spring was still pushing, I guess, setter injection. But yeah, things seem to have moved to constructor injection now. Isn't that correct? Or
I don't know. I've seen to see both. I mean, for the specific scenarios with Dropwizard, that was pretty much your only choice. But with if you see CDI or EJB, Josh, what do you see?
Yeah, whenever I use the CDI, I've just used the default inject annotation, and it works great. I don't have to worry about doing anything with my constructors. You could do constructor injection, but I usually just go ahead and inject at the top of my controller classes or CDI beans, and then I have access to whatever I need to right there.
Yeah, I think so.
That's also the power of Spring too, is that the flexibility, you can do any way you want, basically, right? You can use any of those approaches. So at that point, it's like, well, which one is the right one for this case?
Exactly.
Right? So.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's what the hallmark of any good tool is. I think that's why Spring's done so well, and that's why CDI's done well, in the cases where it's used too, because you have a lot of flexibility. You can decide to, you can decide what approach works best for what you're trying to do. So.
Yep.
All right, let's move on. We got another link here from JQAssist, which I'm curious about. So, who had this one? Maybe I had it. Maybe I added this previously. Okay. So JQAssist, it's a QA tool which allows you to define validation of project-specific rules at a structural level. So it actually uses Neo4j, and you can plug it into your build process, and it enforces like naming conventions for EJBs, JPA entities, test classes, packages, modules, Maven, etc. Separate API and implementation packages, validates dependencies between modules of your projects, and also detects common problems like cyclic dependencies or tests without assertions. So, yeah, this is a fairly new project, and it's a free open source, and you can integrate it into your build. And it's not something I've worked with before, but looks like kind of an interesting project. And it looks like it takes a somewhat of a different stance than some of the static analysis tools. So like I'm used to working with stuff like SonarQube and things like that. But it looks like it works, just the fact that you can enforce naming conventions for specific types of classes is a little bit different. So. This is rules expressed in Cypher, which is an easy-to-use query language from Neo4j. So you can check it out, JQAssistant. Have either of you guys heard of this one before?
No, I've not heard of it.
I don't remember where I came across it, but yeah, I must have been looking at graph databases, I'm guessing. So, all right, cool.
Looks cool.
Oh, yes, now I see where I came across it. So I think the reason I ran into it is because someone used it to generate the JakartaEE dependency analysis. So the link's in the show notes, but they used it basically to determine all the dependencies in JakartaEE. So there's like this really kind of cool image of it, of all the dependencies. So that's a very obvious use case is, getting basically a UML diagram of all the dependencies in your project. So that's where I came up with it. And I think what they were trying to do is determine like any issues they need to deal with in terms of the all the JakartaEE dependencies. So that's a project on GitHub. The links are in the show notes. Looks like Ian found his cat there.
Yeah, my cat found me. Actually, came to check out what's going on.
Very cool.
He wants in on the podcast. Yeah, I realized I had pasted my show note additions into an older document here, so you may not have seen them.
Oh, okay.
So okay. I just added them back, but yeah, I had a pick for. Well, I had an update for front end. Angular 13 has been released. It was actually released back in November. And Angular keeps moving forward. It's really interesting actually being an Angular developer today, because you basically have this 18-month window to get your applications up to date. If you want support, if you want updates, patches from the Angular team, right? So there's always this urgency of like, we have to keep updating the application. Otherwise it goes into LTS. Eventually it's unsupported, right? But anyway, so Angular 13 is out, and with it comes a few interesting developments. The IV engine now is the default and only engine available. They've removed the the old Vue engine, so you can no longer use that. But they do provide some kind of command line compatibility tool, NGCC, which it gives you can compile your code, make it forward compatible with an Ivy-based application if you're still using the old Vue engine. But yeah, Angular 13, let me see what else is new here. Upgrading to TypeScript. So TypeScript keeps evolving, which is another great thing about Angular. You get a lot of benefit from Microsoft through TypeScript additions, and that language just continues to get better and better. And I've Angular 13 also, I think they've removed IE 11 support now, so that is gone. And Angular, IE 11, the countdown continues, right?
I thought I was done with it, but I was talking to a new client recently, and they're like, yeah, some of our people, and actually one of the developers was demoing the app, and I was like, hey, is that IE? And he's like, yeah, it's IE11. I tested this because some of our clients still use this. And I was like, oh, no.
Yeah, IE11 really just puts the brakes on anything interesting in your application. You just stop development, figure out how to support everything you've already built in a browser that's already almost dead. 4 months, 9 days, and 1 hour left to go, and then no more IE11. And it's really, I put the link to the Death to IE11 tool.
Thank you very much. This is going to be my case for them eliminating IE11 support.
Yes. I'm going to put that on my desktop.
Yes, please. I'm sorry to interrupt again. Go ahead.
No, that's good. That's, I think, all I have for Angular 13.
I have a question.
Interestingly, go ahead.
So I've been out of Angular land for a while, which is why I'm amazed about Ivy, because the last time I was more involved with Angular, Ivy was new.
Yes.
they're like we were just releasing Ivy, so the fact that now they're actually getting rid of the other rendering engine is pretty amazing. But my question is, how mature are the Angular material components, or you're even using them, or you're just using the PrimeNG?
I'm still mostly using PrimeNG. Okay. We wrap PrimeNG stuff. I've used a few Angular or a few material. I think it was the Google material design components, though. I don't think it was Angular specific. Well, obviously Google is behind Angular as well, but
I think they were combining them all into one.
I haven't used it. I haven't used them that much, so I can't really say. There was a case where we had some autocomplete bug that wasn't working with PrimeNG, so we switched out that component for the material design one, and it worked. And that was an interesting example of this encapsulation approach that we use, that I like to use, where you introduce your own components, which are your own HTML elements, basically, right? With your namespace, whatever, Kito man, you could have KM - button for your button component. And then behind the scenes, inside that component, you put whatever you want. You can use Angular material design. You could use PrimeNG. You could write something from scratch. And then later, if you change the implementation, your code should still work in theory, as long as you don't break the interface, right, between the component and the application.
Yeah, I like that approach too.
I think it works, and that was an example where we had to swap out one, but most of the time we have no problems with PrimeNG at all. So that's a great thing about that library. And Ivy, I was still making the transition. I do a lot of library development in Angular. And the libraries have been challenging to migrate to Ivy because publishing to NPM, you have some limitations there, and I have to ramp up on that. That was one of the points that wasn't working perfectly out of the box with between 9 and 12, Angular 9 and 12. So it's interesting to see. I was just perusing it, and it looks like it's improved a lot. So the guidelines are clearer, and it's amazing community. They just keeps improving, and Angular's great that way. A lot of constant progress going on.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
Yeah. Right. What else? Speaking of Angular progress, they also announced that Protractor is end of life as of end of this year. Actually, not end of life, but no new development will happen. Right. They're not going to add features to Protractor. So if you're not familiar with Protractor, it was a testing library. It's a wrapper around Selenium, and it was provided by Angular. It's actually part of the Angular stack. So when you generate using Angular CLI, if you generate a new application, you would get this Protractor code E2E folder, end-to-end testing folder with a bunch of some sample code and configuration to get you up and running. So the only problem is that it was pretty cumbersome. If you take a look at, so there was a blog post from Angular about the future of Protractor. and it's actually a GitHub issue that they raised. Somebody asked about that, and they clearly said, look, after Angular 15, we're not going to support Protractor anymore. We don't want to get into that. We want to get out of that technology, right? So in the meantime, like they offered alternatives, right? So right now, as of this, as per this GitHub issue, which was updated in April, the top end-to-end testing tool right now is this thing called Cypress. So I got intrigued. I was like, what is Cypress? Protractor is about 19% of the mind share, and Cypress is about 64%. So I'll add this link to the show notes so you guys can see for yourselves. And I thought, okay, that's cool. Let me go see what people are using today. What's going on with this? Because I've written a lot of Protractor code, and it's not fun to write. There was no async await yet in the JavaScript language, so we had to do a lot of promise handling and error handling. Every time you call a promise, you have to do then and .catch, and you have to make sure you handle errors correctly and wait for things to happen. And there's the asynchronous side of it was a pain, because think about it. You're writing you're scripting a test that interacts with a browser, and there's latency. It's an asynchronous programming model, right? So you look for an element in the DOM, you interact, you script the browser to click on it, simulate a click, you wait for the response. Then you have to deal with server-side communication, API calls, things like that. And that takes time, and it's asynchronous. So it was a little bit difficult to write that code. So this has completely changed. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I just want to say, like, yeah, Cypress. I spent all day today just writing Cypress code. Really, really enjoy it. It's just a much cleaner API, much simpler way to write the code. All the method calls are chained, so you call like cy.get. You can pass any CSS or jQuery selector you want, like dot button, and then you call dot click on that. It returns an observable or a subject, and then everything's chained, right? So you can just write all this code very easily and quickly without having to think about handling promises and asynchronous coding. So it works really well, and it's got a nice UI as well for running your tests, and it opens a window, runs its own test runner, and it looks a lot like Log4j, like when you have that, not Log4j, sorry, but JUnit, when you run the unit test and you see like the green check marks showing up after each test. And so it's great. It really gives you that red-green feeling, test-driven development, but with integration testing. So you're actually running your code locally. You could point it to any URL you want, wherever you're hosting your application. But I'm just using it locally on the local Angular test server with some mock data, no real API call. So it's pretty fast, and it records videos. So as your test, it integrates with your CI server. If the test fails, it records a video of the whole interaction. It runs in a headless browser, and it records the test, and then you can download the video, see what happened, why did it fail, and you can see the interactions. It takes screenshots. You can export report to JUnit, so you can, if your CI server recognizes the JUnit report XML format, it can output that. It can output all kinds of different formats, and yeah, it's quite the amazing tool. You can get up and running with it in about 5-10 minutes, and it generates like a sample application out of the box. Well, it actually calls, they have a website with a simple to-do app that it tests for you. So you install it with npm install Cypress, and then you run Cypress open, and it pops open a little test window, and it demonstrates itself to you. And then it shows you the code. It's like the tutorial is very simple. You get a few examples, under your belt, and then you're up and running. So it really kind of brought back my enthusiasm for integration testing in the browser.
Nice. I had a question for you, because I've always, I've been a Selenium guy for a long time. I've taught Selenium WebDriver a decent amount of times. And also I have done some testing in using Jeb, actually, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Groovy based framework, but Cypress doesn't use, like, what's theoretically good about WebDriver is that it's actually calling an app which talks natively to the browser and tells it, to click on this thing or do this thing, right?
Right.
And Cypress is really just a JavaScript library, right? Isn't it? It's essentially just emulating all those clicks and things using JavaScript, or is it doing it some other way?
It's pretty powerful. It does not use Selenium. It uses the browser's native capabilities, and that's where things have really evolved. Like it runs. Let me see, what was that headless browser called? Because we used to use like Phantom.js and all these different, and Chrome, headless Chrome. You can actually run on your build server a headless Chrome instance, and all those things take time, but at least it worked. You could run your integration test from your build server, which is headless. But now it's using a different rendering engine, of browser engine behind the scenes. So
okay, so it uses its own engine. You don't really have a choice. You can't say,
Electron.
I want to run this test.
Yeah, it uses Electron.
Okay.
Version 94, and yeah, it can run the entire test from the command line. You won't see a pop-up window. You won't see any browser at all. And so it downloads itself. It runs. All the dependencies are self-contained, so you don't need any.
But if you wanted to say
tooling.
Run that test on Chrome, can you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can do cross-browser testing with it as well. So that part I haven't explored thoroughly yet, but the test runner itself runs in Chrome. When you have the GUI mode up and running, when you do Cypress Open, there's Cypress Run and Cypress Open, right? And Open pops up a browser window. So it's for the development mode where you can actually see the test running, and you can write code, and it detects when you modified your code, it runs the tests again. Like as you're writing tests, it refreshes itself and runs the tests again, and you can see as you're writing your tests, you can see them run continuously. And then there's the run mode, which is headless, and that's for the CI integration, right? Where it just executes your test cases.
I work in a team where I was on the back end, so I wasn't really involved. But they used Cypress, and I'm very happy with it. So I did get to read some of their tests, but that's about as far as I got. But yeah, I'm curious because I am working on a side project where we may need to do integration test at some point. And I'm just going to have to understand how it works. Because one of the nice things about the WebDriver model was that the WebDriver was like a standard API, right? And then different browser vendors could implement it, and then you could easily test on any browser that supported WebDriver, and that actually included mobile browsers as well, which is kind of nice.
Right. Interesting.
And I'm not sure. I'm not sure how far Cypress goes in that area, but I'm not sure it really even matters necessarily. If you're using standard JavaScript on a modern browser, maybe you don't need to run it against IE. Maybe it doesn't matter. So I'm curious.
Right. No, you can choose which browser to use with it as well. And I think that's one of the virtues of the modern browsers, is that they've reached a level of maturity now where they have a pretty stable APIs, and their performance is much better. And you can do things like this, like run unit integration tests much more quickly, more seamlessly. I even managed to integrate it with Angular, like basically replace Protractor completely. So Angular has this command line tool, NG. It's called NG, and one of the subcommands is E2E. So you call NG E2E, it runs your Protractor test, and within 5 minutes of following a simple tutorial, I was able to basically remove all traces of Protractor, delete that code, drop in a new and replace it with Cypress, and now we can run Cypress tests from there. So, but yeah, check out the documentation. There's a lot of information. This is a mature tool. It's been around since 2015. It's not like a brand new framework. It's been in the running for a long time, but now it's definitely, I think, in the lead in terms of developer adoption and maturity, features, ease of use. It's just a great experience to write tests with it. So I recommend it.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. I know on this project we're working on it, we're using lit element and web components and TypeScript, but currently we're just using the web test runner, but it's good for testing web components in isolation, right? So we're still going to need something else for doing integration tests. So.
Yeah, and what's really cool, there's a lot. I feel like I'm just seeing the tip of the iceberg with this framework, because there's a lot of cool things you can do with it. Like they're showing examples of how let's say you have a complex application you're testing with multiple screens, right? So you have page 1, page 2, page 3. You're collecting data like a registration form, right? So you test page 1, but now you want to write a unit test for page 2, or an integration test. So what are you going to do? You're going to start over, like that test will call the previous test to populate page 1, navigate to page 2, or is there a way to just start that test from page 2, right? So they have a way. They showed 2 different ways with React and Angular, where you can basically take a snapshot of the application state after page 1 is populated, and then use that as a starting point for your second test. So there's ways to bypass your own UI.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that in the project I was on. That was pretty cool. Just a lot to have that snapshot available.
Yeah, so. Potentials. It's powerful. It's pretty cool.
All right, let's move on. Let's talk a bit about GraalVM. I notice you have a link here, Josh. Is this me or you?
I think that was me. Okay. But if you want to talk about it, that's fine too.
Go for it.
So actually, I am not a huge GraalVM user. I would love to say I was. I want to try and spend more time on it in the future at some point. But
I'm in the same boat.
GraalVM 22.0 is supposed to be new, came out in January, actually the end of January, and it's released for JDK 11 and JDK 17. And this particular version has made changes to reduce image size using a more compressed encoding method for stack frame metadata to reduce the size of all images. It also includes changes for build output for a native image, which now breaks down the build process into stages and visualizes the current stage, showing code and heap breakdowns and statistics of the build. Also, there are changes in the way that the compiler treats profiling information. It's designed as an optimizing JIT compiler. The compiler can switch to an AOT ahead of time mode where major optimizations can perform a reasonable job even in the absence of profiles. And so there are also some other improvements in this, which would include WebAssembly runtime now using the Truffle frame API. For Python, GraalVM builders continue to work on compatibility of GraalVM Python runtime, and Ruby 3.0 support is also included. So
I noticed the ECMAScript, excuse me.
Yes.
2022 mode is enabled by default, which is pretty awesome.
Yep. So this seems like it's pretty noteworthy release, and probably something you want to grab if you want to stay up to date with the GraalVM.
Yeah, and I have been meaning to play with GraalVM for a long time. I should actually use it on my side project. Just have more flexibility there. But yeah, and actually, Josh Long did a talk on GraalVM. Actually, it's more like Kubernetes and native images and stuff with Spring Boot was really more what the topic was. But I'm at the JChampionsConf, and I haven't really had a chance to work with one of these a GraalVM app with native images. Hasn't really been a big need on the projects I'm on, but I've been paying a lot of attention to it. And my thought was, the biggest benefit was theoretical performance improvement, right? Because you don't have all, you're not loading as many classes, and of course it's native, so it should theoretically be faster. But I know that's not always the case, because there's situations where the JVM actually gets faster over time because of the way it's learning about the application with just compilers working. So I asked him about that, and he said, it's not really the performance that's the most important thing. It's really the footprint. So by creating the native image, you get a much smaller memory footprint. So you can theoretically spawn up more instances to handle the load and save costs, essentially. And that was an interesting perspective, because my perspective has always been, it's theoretically faster and it doesn't have the cold startup time. That was another big thing, right? If you got like a Lambda running and it takes a long time for the JVM to launch, that's not a good thing. So I guess there's that's a pretty good way to think of it, is that if you basically have to determine all the dependencies up front and only include the classes which are being used, you get a much smaller footprint in terms of the classes that are loaded by the JVM. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, so yeah, I'd love to play with it sometime in the future.
Yeah, indeed.
So I have a question, guys, about the GraalVM. Again, looking at this from the outside a little bit. I haven't worked with it. I'm just reading the Wikipedia page about it, and it's really interesting, the history behind it. It started at Sun Microsystems as an attempt to build a Java-only, a Java virtual machine written in Java itself to free up from problems in developing with C++. So that was too ambitious, they said at first, and then later they hooked it into the hotspot compiler. So is that still, obviously the goal is to improve performance, right? That's the big picture with GraalVM. Is that the idea, to make the JVM start up faster, or make obviously like other features too, polyglot applications? So how have they achieved that? Is that still part of the foundation, trying to write a runtime in Java itself, or have the goals changed?
I haven't heard that project goal, so I'm guessing that's not a big part of it at all anymore.
Okay.
I mean, my understanding, and Josh, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's basically an umbrella project. So if you go to graalvm.org, it's a few different things, but I think of it as two key different things. One is the ability to generate a native image of any JVM application, right? And the benefit of that is like we just said, it's number one, faster startup time, number two, smaller footprint, both in terms of disk space and in terms of memory. And of course, there are trade-offs too. There's actually, reflection is a big pain. If you look at any runtimes that are optimized for GraalVM, we have to do some magic to make some of your things that often use reflection work. So there's limitations, but that's the idea. But the other part of it, which I think people overlook a lot, is the polyglot aspect, right? So basically, this allows you to run not only Java, but you can run Ruby, Python, JavaScript, and you can do C++ too, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, all in the same JVM, right? And they can actually talk to each other. So you can have an application that has Java code talking to Python, or I think you may even be able to do R. I'm not sure about that, but and now WebAssembly is a really awesome thing, because WebAssembly is a compilation target for the browser. But the fact that they can run WebAssembly is pretty awesome. And then also the fact that they can run JavaScript means you could have a JavaScript app and integrate with Java or Python or whatever. And also, I think it makes a pretty cool node runtime. It can run all the node stuff.
Interesting. I'm looking at the examples of the polyglot usage of GraalVM right now, and it's cool. It looks like they've ported their API to different languages, right? There's a polyglot object for JavaScript. There's an import for Python, and in each case they show the similar example where they're evaluating JavaScript with polyglot. So is this the idea was to introduce a tool that can evaluate other languages within the language that you're using? Is that how polyglot programming works, or?
Yeah, I think the best example I saw was a talk at Code One, where they basically had it was code where they needed to integrate with code written by data scientists, I think in R or something. And so they wrote the backend in Java and then just basically called R or whatever to integrate with that.
Interesting.
So it gives you the ability to have different teams, have different skill sets.
And cool. How deep can that integration go? Like, if there's one thing, it's one thing to evaluate like a simple string of JavaScript as an array in your favorite programming language, but it's probably quite another to import like a whole framework or a set of libraries and classes, for example, from another language into your favorite programming language. So how deep can it go?
Yeah, I don't have any real world experience with it, so I can't tell you.
It's a good question. Yeah, I would love to know that as well.
Yeah.
And actually, I was going to bring up that GraalVM does have a nice, easy framework apparently that you can use for creating support for other languages. So, I mean, I was thinking it'd be awesome to have Swift, you know, as a language that was supported by GraalVM. And it looks like it would be pretty easy to do if you are, of course, a good programmer in Swift and you knew how to implement such things. There is a good template that you can use to add more support. So, yeah,
nice.
Ian, I'm right there with you. I would love to know how much I can integrate from other languages into my Java project or vice versa, you know?
So here's a call, sorry about that. A call out, or not call out, request. If you listen to this podcast and you have real world experience working on GraalVM with multiple languages, please find us on Twitter at stackpodcast.com. Not .com, at stackpodcast, excuse me. We do have a stackpodcast.com website you can go to though. But yeah, find us on Twitter and let us know what you think, because we'd love to hear more about it. Okay, so we should move forward. Ian, you mentioned TabNine here.
Yeah, I know I talked about it in a previous podcast, but I wanted to give an update. I've been using it now for a few months, and I'm enjoying it. It's been helpful. I've had a good experience with it. And what's cool is it has a little local dashboard that you can run. It has a simple web page that shows you your last 30 days progress. So in the last 30 days, 10% of my code was automated by this tool. So that's pretty cool.
Tell us for those who don't know what it is again.
Okay, TabNine is an AI coding assistant with IDE support for basically all the major IDEs. So it plugs in, there's a plugin, an add-on, extension, whatever it's called for your favorite IDE, Eclipse, JetBrains, etc. And you install that, you create it, you can, well, there's different levels of licensing, right? But I think they have a free license. I did sign up for a team license. So what that gives you, even though I'm a team of one, I share my code models across my computer. So if you want to do that, it keeps track of some of your preferences as you're coding and working with this thing. It learns, you know, it learns from your code. I pointed it to some of my GitHub repos, so it went and it kind of looked at my code, and it keeps track of the models, different coding completions that you choose, right, as you work with it. So as you're typing code, it will kind of auto complete for you, but it goes beyond a typical IDE auto completion. It's a little more ambitious, right, in its suggestions. So it tries to, and it's usually pretty close to what you want. Sometimes it goes too far, but you can customize it. You can kind of tell it how many characters of code you're willing to, or you'd like it to generate, you know, like,
that's kind of cool.
So yeah, because sometimes it's like, yeah, I didn't want to call, you know, I'm chaining 3 or 4 function calls together. I only wanted 3 this time, not 4. So how's it supposed to know? Like you can tell it, you know, reduce the number of characters you generate. And, but I'm happy with the defaults actually. And it's working pretty good. And it supports a bunch of different programming languages. You can optimize it for speed or for strength, they say. So strength is for higher accuracy, requiring more resources, recommended for machines with lots of RAM, at least 32 gigs of RAM. And speed runs really fast with fewer data points. So if you have less than 4 gigs of RAM, you can use that, or you can have a balanced approach. And
pretty flexible.
Yeah, it is flexible. But yeah, 10%, you know, 10% of my code I didn't have to type. So I like that.
You inspired me, because every time we talk about this, we also talk about GitHub CoPilot, right? And I actually, on this project I'm working on, we're using VS Code. Some of us are using VS Code. And, you know, I got in CoPilot and turned it on a while back, and I hadn't used it because I hadn't used VS Code. So I opened up VS Code. I started working on my project. They're like, do you want to enable CoPilot? I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. I start working on it, and it like freaks me out because it starts completing all this stuff. Like I'm editing a JSON file, and it like guesses like all the properties of the objects that I'm putting in there. And like, I'm like, oh my God, this is sketchy. But But I'm pretty impressed with it. Just the amount that it knows from the context, and it does give you like a list of the options and stuff that it's thinking essentially.
Yes.
But what bugs me about it is that since GitHub is now owned by Microsoft, it only supports VS Code because that's how these companies work, right? So apparently GitHub used to make plugins for Eclipse and IntelliJ, but they don't anymore. So if I want that kind of support in my favorite IDE, which is still IntelliJ, then this tool sounds like a good choice.
Yeah, like I said, I'm pretty happy with it. I've tried a few other products as well, but the one I think you're talking about, I remember seeing an example of it where they scanned all the open source repos on GitHub, and the thing generates like 20 lines of code. You type 2 characters, it spits out like 30 lines of code. That's like another level of coding assistance. Like this tool does not do that. TabNine is a single line of code at a time. Gotcha. Although you could I haven't tweaked it. Maybe you could get it to generate more code, but I like a little more conservative approach when it comes to coding assistance. I don't want to have to backspace too much or cancel out the options. So, I went with like a minimal kind of conservative approach, balanced approach.
What I was thinking about though is that, this kind of like just getting into the area where AI is affecting us and the work we do, right?
Right.
But I think it's going to get to a point where like you are going to have to use one of these assistants to be as efficient as the next guy. Or the next
well, that's what's interesting. It's I think, and you're right. It's not, I think of it in terms of competing with myself. Like, how can I push myself further? How can I write better, faster, cleaner code with fewer bugs in it, right? And that's why I love these tools like Cypress, because I can see myself using that daily. Like, I could write tons of integration tests. And that's always been a goal of mine, is just to have a ton of, have a test harness that every change I make, it's about confidence. You want to know every single change you make, you want to have full confidence in that code change, that it's going to produce the result you want. It's not going to have any side effects or cause a regression or introduce a bug.
Here's what I'm saying. It's like you're a really good developer. You're one of the best developers I've ever worked with.
Thank you, Kito.
And that's awesome. But I'm thinking about like all the other developers that aren't quite as motivated to be better like you. They're going to have to use one of these tools to keep up with people who are using them.
That's a good question. And the thing is, like, the AI, because it's personalized, like it reflects your own ability as a programmer too, in a way. And if somebody's using it to try to generate code faster, I mean, it might help them generate less efficient code or less elegant code or the wrong code. Like, it doesn't know. That's the thing. AI doesn't know, like, whether that's the right or the wrong code to generate. That comes from your...
That's the thing. Yeah, it's like you can't blindly pick whatever it generates because it may not be the right thing.
Right. And that's where we come back to that theme of like the 4GL, like who knows what the right code is? At the end of the day, it's probably the end user, right? Who knows whether or not they want that. And often they don't know what they really want until they saw what they asked for, and they realize that's not exactly what they wanted. And so it's iterative. That's why Scrum Agile works so well in software, because we know, like, out of the gate, we're going to build it exactly as you ask us to, but it might not be right, and that's okay. So, I mean, that's why it's iterative. But yeah, with the 4GL approach, like the idea that, and we talked about this no code concept as the latest iteration of 4GL kind of approach, 4th generation programming language, where an end user can sit down and hit a few keys and generate an application. And, we've seen that in our own experience too with Seam, actually, for example, and that was really cool. I thought, like, this is a great tool for developers because we can generate a blog application now, like just CRUD application from scratch, like couple of commands on the command line, you generate your application. AppFuse did it. There's a lot of tools that kind of generate an application for you, but
so far they've never really done that well. I'm curious to see if this new generation, I imagine some of them will work out.
Well, yeah, it depends.
There's more people that want to code now than there's ever been.
Right.
So we'll see.
Yeah, and Josh, that's good. I mean, they talk about. Sorry, go ahead.
sorry, Ian. I know, Josh, you need to go soon. So we should probably pick any topics you want to talk before you drop.
I guess, I mean, we could just continue on. I could just drop off here in about 10 minutes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we could just go through the flow, and if we don't make it to whatever I've got, then that's fine.
Okay, that's cool. All right, so I figured, since we do a lot of Java stuff on this podcast, we should at least mention Log4Shell. We're kind of way late for it since it happened at the end of December, so it's been more than a month ago. But
by the way, did you guys patch all your Log4j installations?
Well, fortunately for me, I'm not responsible for anything in production right now, so I was able to just tell all my clients, hey, here's the Log4j thing, and then a couple of days later, oh, by the way, there is no new version. So fortunately, I didn't have to do anything. I just had to keep up with it. So
I was able to patch.
Nice.
Did
you go with the system property, just disabling the JNDI lookups from the command line?
Well, I couldn't in some cases because there were older versions of Log4j running, so I had to actually do a copy. So I took I did the hot approach where I took the jar and I swapped it in, and then just did a restart of the instance, and so it seemed like everything worked okay.
I think that to me, like, if not everyone can do that, but if you can, that seems like the easiest thing to do. Like easiest and safest. You're not going to break anything unless you're depending on that feature,
right?
Which would be an issue. So just in case you've been living under a rock the last month or so, the Log4Shell is a vulnerability in the Apache Log4j library, which almost every Java project uses, except for the few that don't. They use logback or something else. So it's just been a very widespread problem. There's a whole bunch of scrambling right before Christmas to patch it, and there were a few different versions. They patched it and they found another bug, or they found they didn't completely fix it, and there was another one. And did you guys have to patch it multiple times? I was wondering. I was thinking about the poor people that patched it right away and then had to go back and patch it like 2 days later, because I think there were like 3 or 4 releases before they. And also, what happened was once basically everyone started trying to exploit it, so they found new issues after that. Right? There were a couple other issues that were unrelated that were fixed, if I remember correctly. So
that's interesting. I thought the mitigation, like Red Hat put out an example, like several ways to mitigate it, but the command line one seemed that just turning off that feature that evaluates the variables within the log statement. I think that one was the most effective one, but I'm not aware of additional vulnerabilities. I know they patched in version 2 point something, so that newer versions are secured. But it's really interesting.
There were a couple other issues they found later on, so I guess the latest one now.
Yeah, I think 2.16 was the major patch that patched the big vulnerability, but I think after that, the subsequent releases patched edge cases where you wouldn't be so subject to the vulnerability occurring.
I see.
But I think now they're up to 2.17.1 the last time I checked. But it's been a few weeks since I checked. So
no, I'm checking now. It's 2.17.1.
Yep.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's actually well documented in the Wikipedia mitigation section. They talk about the initial recommendation was to set a system property, but it didn't prevent exploitation of another vulnerability. It was later found not to disable the message lookups. Wow, so you were not out of the woods. So you can really make sure.
Yeah, so if you think you're out of the woods, you should just check your version. I mean, if you can go to 2.17.1, probably a good idea, because that version fixes. Let's see if I exploit this. This is a RCE via the JDBC appender. So there's a lot of little issues, and it's one of those things where what fascinates me about this issue is that no one noticed, like, for years. This feature has been out, I think, since like 2013 or something. And and someone sent me a link to the actual feature request for the JNDI lookup.
Oh wow!
So it's been out for a long time, and I'm sure some people have been exploiting it quietly for the last several years, but now it's everybody knows about it, and they found other bugs which probably been there for a long time too. So.
Yeah, and we were saying earlier, I mean, this doesn't happen that often that you hear about an open source Java library with a severe vulnerability. I mean, we had the extreme deserialization bug. We had this Log4Shell, but it's been fairly secure. I mean, Java ecosystem has been pretty secure over the years. There haven't been too many like supply chain attacks that we're aware of. That hopefully not. But I mean, the Maven Central. I mean, is Maven Central scanning the code for vulnerabilities?
Sure,
I think so.
Something like that.
Yeah, because if you look, you can actually see which releases have vulnerabilities through Maven Central.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is that I think part of the reason why we don't have a lot of issues is like a lot of companies happily give their products to like for free licensing for any open source Java organization, right? Like Atlassian or mentioned Sonar earlier, Nexus. All these organizations give away free licenses for their products, enterprise editions with all the great tooling. So I'm sure these companies, Apache in particular, have been using a lot of those tools to keep their code secure in the first place. So. But yeah, I think speaking of vulnerability scanning, have you guys heard about this snick.io? I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yep.
It's cool. Actually, interestingly, snyk.io.
Yeah, that's what said to me. Okay.
Yeah, I first heard of them because they did one of the Jakarta EE surveys or polls a couple of years ago and presented it. But yeah, go ahead, Ian. This is a cool tool.
It came into my inbox through an Atlassian promotion of some kind, and I said, okay, I'll try it. I enabled it. I gave it access to one of my repos, and it's pretty cool. It goes and scans your pom.xml file and gives you a report by email saying you got some issues or your code is okay, and so it helps you identify vulnerabilities. And it looks really good. I think some tools like that today are kind of essential. And speaking of logging too, there are other logging frameworks out there. I know obviously upgrading Log4j is one solution, but there's other tools like the OWASP logger, ESAPI logger. I'm not sure if you guys ever used that one before, ESAPI.
Logback is pretty much the only other one I see a lot.
Okay.
But,
Logback, yeah, those are all, wasn't that also created by the same developer initially, like the guy who created Log4j?
That was SLog4j, I think.
Ah, right. Okay.
Which a lot of people use with either Logback or Log4j.
Right. No, ESAPI it was like a ground up reimplementation of logging with security in mind. And it's a little cumbersome to use, I have to say. The ease of use of Log4j is a lot better, but it's pretty smart. I mean, it sanitizes all the log messages. There's a Java doc I'll put up here on the show notes for you guys. ESAPI. It's recommended by OWASP. So if you're familiar with OWASP, the web standard security organization, they recommend this one. So it's one of the recommended tools. So. The Open Web Application Security Project, OWASP.
Thank you. I was just looking that up. Thank you. Yeah. And they always are good at keeping. They've always got the OWASP top 10, which, by the way, is another one of those JChampionsConf talks you should go look at. I didn't see it, but I noticed, and I was like, I should go to that. And I did. So, you should go check it out. So cool. All right. So I think we could beat Log4j forever, but I think that's good for now. So looks like Groovy 4 is out.
Yeah, Groovy 4, and it's one of those languages that is just been around for a while, since the early 2000s actually, and it's lots of people have been using it. There are a lot of great frameworks out there, Micronaut and Grails, of course, and others. And now Groovy 4.0, it's good to see it continue moving on, is what I guess I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
It does have a lot of new features actually in this release. There are some changes to the switch expressions. There actually are switch expressions now instead of switch statements, I should say. And it's kind of like the Java, but it's a little bit different. And actually, if you look at the release notes, it shows you actually what's different between this and Java. So it's kind of cool to see that. They also have sealed types now in Groovy. And again, they show you some differences to Java in the release notes, which is kind of a good thing. They do have their own record-like classes now in an incubating stage. So you can take a look at that. It looks like you add annotation of record type to the top of your, almost looks like, the records in Java, but you add that annotation to the top and very minimal code. There's built-in type checkers, built-in macro methods. Java shell is incubating. And Pojo annotation, and several others. So certainly if you're using Groovy already, you'll definitely want to take a look at 4.0, but even if you haven't yet used Groovy, it's probably something you may want to take a look at some point.
Yeah, it's like one of those like hidden gems. I mean, I don't know if I'd want to use it for like hardcore, back-end production code. But maybe it's just because I think there's a lot of extra overhead involved that I'm not, and I could actually just have an incorrect perspective on it. But I've used it for a lot of scripting areas, and I've recently used it for Jenkins pipeline scripting, which is really great for that. And I'm sure it's great for a Gradle and all sorts of other uses as well. So.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're getting into Micronaut, then this is certainly one of the best languages to use for that. That's an easy way to create microservices.
I did not know that. I mean, it makes total sense that that's a big part of Micronaut, but I didn't realize that it was easy to do microservices with Groovy and Micronaut. So
yeah,
makes total sense. All right, cool. So Kotlin 1.6 as well, another JVM language.
Yep, Kotlin 1.6 came out. And to be quite honest with you, I don't know. I have to apologize because I don't have the new features in front of me here on this one. So you may want to cut that out of the...
I've got some here. We've got sealed when statements, suspending functions, and suspend conversions, instantiation of annotation classes, improved regular type inference, and a builder type inference as well. So sealed when statements, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, that would be real interesting.
Yeah. It makes the Kotlin compiler warn you if your when statements are not exhaustive. Yeah. So this is another language which I've been meaning to work with and have not. Have either of you actually worked with Kotlin before?
Yeah.
I have not.
You've not? I actually have been looking at it for quite some time. I've kind of dabbled in it, written some small things, never put anything in production with it yet, but I would love to at some point. Actually, I was looking at integrating some Kotlin into some of my Jakarta EE applications just here and there. It's pretty easy to do that. But there also is a framework called Kito, and this is a web framework for Kotlin, and it makes it really easy to create web services and microservices. And so, just another framework, of course, but using Kotlin, and it's a really nice syntax. I like it a lot, and I compare it to Swift. It's Swift and Kotlin are very similar.
Yeah, I can see that. Definitely. Very cool. I didn't know they had a Kotlin native as well, but I guess that kind of makes sense.
Yep. And certainly I should mention too, if you're an Android developer, you definitely want to get into Kotlin because I think that's the main language now for doing Android development.
Yeah, I don't think it's, I agree. I mean, we had a Android project a while ago, and we're still using Java, but I know any newer project is going to be using Kotlin these days. So.
Yep.
All right, cool. I think let's just move on to the picks, and then we can wrap up. I think we're running up on way over an hour here, or a little bit over an hour, I should say.
If you want me to just go first real quick, and then I'll have to jump off here.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I apologize. I just kind of wanted to mention Swift Playgrounds, and the reason I want to mention it is because if you've not ever seen, or even if you've heard of Swift Playgrounds in the past, this is an application that is available on the iPad, also available on Mac. But it's an easy way to get into developing for Swift. Gives you lots of problems and solutions that you can solve and learn Swift really easily. But now, since like December, I believe, at the middle of December, Swift Playgrounds 4 came out, and you can actually create an application, a full Swift application on the iPad, and deploy it to the App Store. And so you can do all your entire application development process on an iPad now, which is pretty cool. And I've really kind of gotten into a little more Swift and Swift UI on the iPad now since I can do it, and it's real nice. You can just test it right there and everything, and it's pretty slick.
I heard about that, but I hadn't actually played with it. I have Swift Playgrounds, but I played with it a little bit thinking my kids could get into it. But I haven't gotten into it enough myself to play with it. So that's awesome.
Yeah, there's a new project. It doesn't look any different. Like if you were to open it up and not know about this, it probably wouldn't, be very intuitive. But there's a new project type called App, and when you open it up, it allows you to create an app, and you can go ahead and distribute that to the App Store. Pretty slick. It makes it a little bit easier. I think the learning curve has really gotten a little easier for people coming into this and trying to become an app developer for iOS.
Nice. Yeah, I should play with that. I've never done it Swift UI anymore. Before? Do you guys like it? No.
Swift UI, I tried working with that. Unfortunately, my application, because I build frameworks, it works if you're developing an application, but if you're developing a framework with UI components in it, then it doesn't work. You have to fall back to like Interface Builder. But I did look into it. It looks pretty cool. I mean, it's a nice. Apple's UI model has improved a lot in the few generations of Xcode that I've been working with, and the auto layout was really one of the most recent big improvements. And Swift UI came after that. But auto layout just is like to jump back to Swing UI, right? You had the grid bag layout, which kind of lets you adapt your thing, and you have these constraints, and you can flexibly, add flexible space elements in your UI and make things like kind of scale, right? So as you expand the window, elements snap to like the edges and they stay there, or they scale, they increase in size or decrease in size. And that's what auto layout does. But yeah, Swift UI, I wanted to work with it, but it was like, oh, you're building a framework, you can't use this. So I had to stop.
No, bummer.
I just want to mention real quick, speaking of Swift UI, there's a really good tutorial out there called 100 Days of Swift UI. If you go to hackingwithswift.com, I'll put it in the show notes. It's free, and you can go and you spend a little bit of time each day, and you can learn Swift UI pretty easily. It's pretty cool.
Cool. Nice. Cool. All right. Well, Josh, you're free to leave us.
I'm going to have to take off. It was great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us again, and enjoy your kids' soccer game. No, basketball game. Yes, basketball game.
Will do, and you enjoy your weekends.
All right.
Have a good weekend, Josh.
Take care, you too. Thanks.
Take it easy.
Bye.
Speaking of kids, so for Christmas, Santa got our kids this little instrument called Orba, which is my pick because I kind of wish Santa had got me one. So it's a little instrument, and it integrates, of course, with your iPad or phone or your MacBook, your Mac, but also it does MIDI and can integrate with like actual like real music software like Logic and stuff like that. But it's like a little handheld device, and it basically you can use it to create little songs, and it has like, eight little pads, and it has like 4 voices. So you can have like drums, lead, bass, and chords.
Nice.
And basically just with the device, even if you don't use your Mac or your iPhone or iPad or whatever, you can basically create a little sequence. You can loop, create a little beat and everything. And it's just a great little controller.
Nice.
So it's like $100. So if you like music and just want to play something without being too serious about it, you should check it out. It's in the show notes.
Wow, it's a tiny device. Like that could fit in the palm of one hand. I thought I was picturing like a MIDI interface to desktop.
Yeah.
Tabletop.
Yeah, like I could actually see using it as just a MIDI interface just to screw around with.
That is pretty cool. And so it has an app as well. How does that work?
App lets you change sounds. It lets you record and save songs that, like, if you create your own sequence in there, you can save it.
Nice.
And it also lets you, it also makes it easier to do things like change the voice and stuff like that. But you can do that with the device itself.
Make songs in seconds. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, and of course, if you watch the videos, the people like, just like in all these videos, in like 2 seconds, they build up this incredible song and they make it look like really easy, But yeah, I should check it out. So
that is awesome. And so my pick, if after you've been busy making music with your Orba, and you have all these files that you need to store somewhere, and you need disk space, right? Well, my pick is the SoftRAID and the Thunderbay 4 external hard drive enclosure from Otherworld Computers, who have been specializing in Apple technology for over 20 years.
I think I have that exact array. So
do you?
Very good choice. Yeah,
it's awesome.
But I had an issue with SoftRAID. I think I ended up using the regular version, the built-in stuff.
Built-in disk utilities for Mac. Yeah, what's great about SoftRAID is just it's a RAID management tool. You can configure your disk array however you want, and it keeps track of it, monitors it, runs the smart tests on it. So keeps you updated on the status of your disks in case something fails, and it's like kind of a software management interface for your hardware, your disks. But yeah, I really like. I had to use it recently. Actually, I had a small hard drive failure, and I was able to restore because I also have a NAS on my network, so I was able to restore like lots and lots of files. So that over my 10G wired connection. So that went fast, and it's great to have redundant backups. You need it. You never know when hard drives will fail. Like that's the thing with hard drives, right? They don't last forever, and you will eventually need to replace them. So it's good to plan ahead. And RAID just means you have like some redundancy, right? If something fails, you can swap it out without losing all your data. So
yes, and I will tell you, don't make this mistake that I made once. I don't know what I was doing, but I had a RAID array. This is before I got the Thunderbay thing. And one disk was like flaking out, and I didn't deal with it quickly enough. And then the other disk failed.
Oh no!
and I basically lost a lot of data because I didn't deal with it quickly.
Oh man!
So here's the minute you see a problem with one drive in your RAID array, make sure that you
yes. Good advice.
Fortunately, it wasn't like super important data, but there were a few things that I really wish I had lost. So.
For sure. Yeah, that happened to me recently. I had to return a drive back to it was a new drive too. Sometimes you get a drive, it's got bad sectors on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I popped it in and it said, no, there's bad sectors. So I had to physically remove the drive, and the things, I had 3 other disks in a RAID 10 array. So it had the striped and mirrored. So that means if there's 2 pairs of disks, right? So it can tolerate 2 drive failures, right? With 1 in each pair. So as long as both failures are not in the same pair of disks, then you're okay. So anyway, it was just 1 disk. So I removed it, got the new one, and it's magic watching it rebuild itself, right? Like your disk controller, disk station, whatever you're using. like reconstruct the data like on the new disk. So yeah, it's good to keep your data backed up.
Yep, indeed. I also use CrashPlan, and I also have like another backup for my main computer, just so like using SuperDuper just to have an image I can boot from.
Yeah. Do you use Time Machine at all, or?
Yeah, I use Time Machine as well.
Cool.
So it's like I have different backup strategies now that I make sure I never lose anything again. So.
Yeah, that's a good plan.
All right, so let's wrap up here. First of all, I want to mention we've got 3 other podcasts in the Pubhouse network. There's Breaking into Open Source, Offheap, and Java Pubhouse. All great podcasts. And Offheap and Java Pubhouse come out regularly. Breaking into Open Source is more ad hoc. But you can find them all at pubhouse.net, as well as our podcasts. You can also get to our podcast directly at stackpodcast.com. So check all those out if you like podcasts. And we've got a few events coming up. And we don't have that many, but one which I forgot to put the date for. 2 days. All right, I'll put it in the show notes. But coming up, there's JDays, it's Istanbul, which is this year. Yes, I can't find it, but I'll add to the show notes. I'm participating in a couple of Jakarta Tech Talks. So if you're interested in Jakarta EE or microprofile or any of that kind of stuff, there's several different Tech Talks all year. There's like one every month. So the link's in the show notes, but basically, any month there can be a really cool talk you can just go to randomly. It doesn't have to be a big commitment. So you should check that out. Dev Nexus 2022 is going to be April 11th through 13th. And that's an in-person conference. I'm not going to be there, but hopefully they'll be able to pull it off. I think they had some difficulties with the in-person ones last year. So we'll cross our fingers.
Yes.
That'll be a great conference if it happens. So, and going out to May, we have the Software Design and Development Conference in London, UK. I have not been to this, but I know Neil Ford and Mark Richards said this was a good one to get to. So
nice.
It looks like it's actually happening in person, looks like. So cool. All right.
That's good to hear.
I think that's about it for the first episode of 2022. Any final words, Ian?
Hey, keep your code clean and keep your head up. We're going to get through this pandemic sooner rather than later. So.
Yes. Just because it's turning to an endemic, but but that makes it much easier to manage, right? So it's all
I
good.
hope so.
So thanks a lot for listening. We have some guests coming up in future episodes, so definitely keep your eyes open for tweets at Stack Podcast on Twitter and stackpodcast.com. And again, if you've worked with GraalVM, shoot us a tweet. Let us know how it goes. And I opened up the DMs for our for Stack Podcast. Don't abuse the privilege, but you can drop us a line. So all right, Ian. Thanks a lot for joining me. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Kito. Thanks everyone.